Welcome to Drum Talk, and today we're going to talk about the drummers of the Carpenters. One of my favorite bands to do drum covers of has been the Carpenters. Today, what I'm going to primarily try to do is talk about the drummers, the drums, and what inspired me to play these drum covers and why I got into doing Carpenters drum covers. I'm also sitting behind my Pearl Fiberglass drum kit, which I've used on a lot of the drum covers, and the first drum cover I did was called Goodbye to Love.
It's goodbye to love. I'll say goodbye to love.
And the reason why I did Goodbye to Love was because I felt this drum kit could best be used to play like Hal Blaine, who I believe was the drummer on almost all of the hit songs by the Carpenters. I have come to learn that I did not know who played on all the hit songs and who even played on all the albums. But I've done some research to try to get us in the ballpark of some of the drummers that played on the albums and some of the drummers other than Hal Blaine that played on the albums that I've covered some of those songs from those albums. So today I've got a big task ahead of me. I'm going to try to piece it together and make it all work. And I'm going to let you understand that from the perspective of the Carpenters, the first drummer of the Carpenters was Karen Carpenter.
Is Karen, his younger sister. Now, Karen used to hear Dick play, and she used to get so filled with rhythm that she'd play on the kitchen chairs and the table. And finally she decided, well, I better get some drums. She did that and decided to play along with Dick. So that was two of them. Roll, and they play jazz, and they play blues, you name it. Right now they're going to play Dancing in the Street. From California State at Long Beach, the Dick Carpenter Trio. Here they are.
Calling out around the world, are you ready for a brand new beat? Summer's here and the time's right for dancing in the streets. They'll be dancing in Chicago, down in New Orleans.
Now, how did I get into Carpenter's music? Being a good child of the 60s, growing up in the 60s, having my teenage years formed in the 70s, you would have thought I would be into Led Zeppelin or some of those other heavier bands. But in actuality, in my house, my mom played a lot of pop music on the radio. And the pop music on the radio meant I listened to a lot of bubblegum and all kinds of stuff. But this one artist, Karen Carpenter, my mom liked enough to actually buy an album. And around our house, we didn't have a lot of albums at the time because my sister would be the primary record buyer during my teenage years. I didn't buy a lot of albums until I became a drummer, had a drum kit, and I got into the band Chicago, who you also know is another band I cover, do a lot of their songs. But the first album that I saw that had a drummer of fame on was the Carpenters album, Close to You. And how did I know he was a drummer of fame and somebody who did studio sessions? Because he was also the drummer on the Partridge Family album, another album where he was credited as being the drummer. Little would I know that I'd been listening to Hal Blaine my whole life on bubblegum pop radio of AM radio. Hal Blaine played on the Beach Boys albums. He played on The Association, and he played on a myriad of 60s hits. So Hal Blaine, not a common name to anybody at that point in time, but he was a common name to me as being a drummer that played on the Carpenters records. Now, when I was a kid, I loved looking at the back albums and figuring out who played on what. And when I became a drummer, I really wanted to know who the drummers were of these bands that I was playing the music of. So, Close to You being the first album that I heard Carpenter's music had two hits on it. Those two hits were Close to You and We've Only Just Begun.
Just like me, they long to be close to you.
And Hal Blaine played drums on both of them. But Close to You, the album Close to You, was the second Carpenters studio album, released in 1970. And it was released after the first album called Offering, and later renamed Ticket to Ride, was released. Ticket to Ride was the first Carpenter album that put the duo together on record. They shared vocals. Both Karen and Richard Carpenter shared the vocals and the limelight, so to speak. But Karen's vocal is what got people excited. Now, Karen was excited about being a drummer. She learned the rudiments. She learned jazz. She learned from Buddy Rich and Gene Krupa and the drummers of the day. She could swing. She was that kind of a drummer. She could read and swing. And she wanted to be the drummer in the band. That's what she wanted to be. And she was happy to be the drummer of that duo. And one of the people that discovered the Carpenters was a guy named Joe Osborne, who's a bass player, a studio bass player in LA. And Joe Osborne had some part of discovering the Carpenters. Joe Osborne would be a connecting thread to almost every album that I'm going to talk about here about the Carpenters. Joe Osborne played bass on a lot of albums other than the Carpenters, but this was one group, Joe Osborne. When you saw studio albums, you would see Joe Osborne's name all the time. So let's talk about how I got really into playing drums and playing Carpenters music. Now, that brings me back to my first drum kit. My first drum kit was a Ludwig Vistalite, blue Vistalite kit. And I was inspired to buy a blue Vistalite kit after going to my first concert, which was the Carpenters. I saw the Carpenters at the Garden State Arts Center in 1975 with Neil Sedaka opening up. And I will never forget seeing Karen Carpenter playing behind a clear Vistalite kit, and their other drummer, who I would learn was Cubby O'Brien, playing on another Vistalite kit that looked like a blue Vistalite kit, but it might have been the blue Swirl kit. Under the lights, you really couldn't tell, but I saw two of these clear kits. I was hooked on those drums as being a possibility for my drum kit when I finally got one. At this point, I didn't have a drum kit. I was 14. I wanted to play drums. I desperately wanted to get into playing drums, but I was still not at the place where I had a drum kit. So when it came time for me to buy a drum kit, we went to the music store in town called Blue Note Music in Long Branch, on Broadway in Long Branch, and what was sitting in the top second floor window was the featured drum kit in the store was a blue Vistalite kit. And that was the kit I bought that day. 8x12, 9x13, 16x16, 14x22, and a 5x14 Vistalite, blue Vistalite snare drum to go with the kit. I would come to find out that Karen Carpenter played Ludwig drums. A lot of people played Ludwig drums, probably because of the influence of Ringo Starr. Matter of fact, most of the drummers that played with the Carpenters played Ludwig at some point in time in their career. So that's just an aside of everything. So let's talk about Karen's drum kit and Karen being a drummer. Now, some of the early videos of Karen playing with the Carpenters live would be videos of her playing a Silver Sparkle Ludwig kit with a 9x13 tom, a 16x16 floor tom, possibly a second 16x16 floor tom, looked like a 22-inch bass drum but could have been bigger, a 5x14 superphonic or super sensitive snare drum, and 4 concert toms, 6, 8, 10, 12, right in front, leaning up against her drums. She had a very unique looking kit. Hardware was not set up with booms back in that day. So for her to get those toms in a place where she could play them, she actually leaned them up against the 13-inch tom. Crazy stuff. Now, she played on the first album called Offering, later called A Ticket to Ride, and the big hit was Ticket to Ride, a Beatles tune. So they loved the Beatles. They would put Beatles tunes on other albums as well as time went on. And matter of fact, on the Close to You album, there was a Beatles tune called Help. believe Karen played on Help. But Hal Blaine was the drummer on Close to You. And why was he brought in to be the drummer? Because Hal Blaine had this huge concert tom kit with 7 concert toms wrapped around a blue Sparkle Ludwig kit with a 9x13 tom and a 16x16 floor tom and a 14x22 inch bass drum and a Ludwig Superphonic snare drum. And then he had 7 concert toms, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15 concert toms, Blame Air toms. And Hal had a touch that he played very open melodic fills. And that's what Hal Blaine was known for, playing do-do-do-do-do, or blah, do-do-do-do. You know, those kind of simple fills, kind of like what Ringo Starr played. When you listen to We've Only Just Begun, you hear big Hal Blaine fills.
Watch time on the way. Talking it over, working together, together. And when the evening comes, we smile. So much of life ahead. We'll find a place where there's room to grow. And yes, we've just begun.
Karen was more influenced by being a drummer of the day, and drummers of the day were taught to be club date drummers. But she did not have the mindset of a Hal Blaine who came in and played parts for albums all the time. So that's why they brought Hal Blaine in. And Hal Blaine, in his book in 1990, the story of his life, his autobiography, he claimed to play on almost all the Carpenters albums. So I thought Hal Blaine was the drummer of the Carpenters. I would come to find out that that wasn't necessarily true as they got older and their career got longer. But the early albums, Close to You, Hal Blaine, Joe Osborne, and Karen played on those albums. The next album was called Carpenters, 1971, and Hal Blaine played on Rainy Days and Mondays. He played on For All We Know. He played on a song called Let Me Be the One. He played on another hit song called Superstar.
Long ago, and oh so far away, I fell in love with you before the second show. Your guitar, it sounds so sweet and clear, but you're not really here. It's just the radio. Don't you remember you told me you loved me, baby? You said you'd be coming back this way again, baby. Baby, 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 oh baby, I love you, I really do.
And these were, again, all great ballad songs for the most part, which allowed a lot of that open Hal Blaine concert tom madness to happen. I was extremely influenced by that feel. I was extremely influenced by those sounds. Now, could Karen have learned how to play that? Probably she could have, but remember, in the studio, time was money, and Hal brought what it took to make hit records in the studio, and that's what it was all about. The fourth album was called A Song for You, and again, Hal Blaine, Joe Osborne, and Karen played on that album. It would have songs like Hurting Each Other, It's Gonna Take Some Time, And my wife's personal favorite, I Won't Last a Day Without You.
Without you. So many times when the city seems to be without a friendly face, a lonely place, it's nice to know that you'll be there if I need you, and you'll always smile. It's all worthwhile when there's no getting over that rainbow, when my smallest of dreams won't come true. I can't take all the madness the world has to give, but I won't last a day without you. Touch me and I end up singing. Troubles seem to up and disappear. You touch me with the love you're bringing. I can't really lose when you're near.
Many of the songs I'm talking about here, I've actually played covers of. Even some of the B songs. On the first album, Close to You, I played on a song, I'll Never Fall in Love Again. I also did Help. And I also did Love is Surrender. Now, I don't know if Hal played on any of those tunes. I know he didn't play on all of those tunes. Some of those tunes were Karen songs that Karen played on. But as they got more hits and they became more happy with hits, Hal played on a lot of those hits. And Song for You had a bunch of hits on it. Song for You had I Won't Last a Day Without You, Goodbye to Love, Hurting Each Other, Top of the World, Song for You. These are all songs that were part of that album. The next album, called Now and Then, was pretty much a cover album. And that's the one album after the first four albums where Karen played drums on almost the entire album. She played on everything but one song that was the first single, I believe, of the album, or the first or second single. I think the first single was Sing. The second single was Jambalaya on the Bayou. Hal Blaine played drums on that. Other than that, it was Karen the rest of the album. By 1973, they were getting tired of Karen being behind drum kits, so they wanted to get a full-time drummer. And somewhere in the 1973-74 era of the band, they hired a drummer who'd been a drummer on television back when he was a kid, a guy named Cubby O'Brien. Cubby O'Brien was in the Mouseketeers. He was in the Mickey Mouse Club. He was a Mouseketeer. And Cubby O'Brien became the drummer, the live drummer for the Carpenters. And Cubby's drumming skills, again, was very similar to Karen's, but he wanted to be more of a session drummer. He wanted to play on records and stuff. So I'm sure he was basically studying the work of the Hal Blaines of the time, hoping to fall into those shoes at some point in time. But Cubby was a great live drummer. He had a lot of presence in a live setting, a lot of pizzazz, and he had big drum kits. Cubby O'Brien's Carpenters kit was basically a Ludwig kit. Now, he did play a Rogers kit on a Johnny Carson show one time. But for the most part, when I saw Cubby O'Brien, he was playing a big Vistalite kit. Now, he had one kit was an Octa Plus, all concert toms. Later on, you would see him in backing the Carpenters, and you would see him playing a Big Beat kit, which was a 9x13, 10x14 double-headed toms, 16x16, 16x18 floor tom, 24-inch bass drum. He'd have a superphonic snare drum or a super sensitive, I'm not sure which. And then he would have 6, 8, 10, 12 concert toms. So he had a lot of toms and a lot of stuff around him. He played Zildjian cymbals just like Karen played. Cubby definitely stole from Hal Blaine. He played all those hit songs and medleys and other things. There's an album called Carpenters Live at the Palladium, And I did a cover from the medley, the Carpenter medley from that album, which is like 11, 12 minutes long. And Cubby played drums on it. He went through everything from Close to You to Goodbye to Love at the end.
I'll say goodbye.
Cubby was a great drummer. He was a Ludwig drummer. Now, I don't know if he started as a Ludwig drummer. From what I can tell, he had a Rogers kit on that one show with Johnny Carson, so probably when he came into the Carpenters camp, they helped him get a Ludwig endorsement, just like Karen Carpenter had. Now, Karen Carpenter had two kits. One was two kits in the early days, I'll say it this way. She had two kits in the early days. One was the Silver Sparkle Ludwig kit. The other one was a clear Ludwig kit. They were both set up the same way with a 14 by 22 inch kick, 9 by 13, 16 by 16 floor tom, a Vistalite snare drum with super sensitive, okay, or a metal superphonic. And she had 6, 8, 10, 12 concert toms leaned up against her, just like they did on the kit when it was the Silver Sparkle kit. Karen would also get a set of Blamier toms from Hal Blaine. Blamier was the type of fiberglass drums that Hal Blaine used. And Hal Blaine, besides his little blue sparkle kit of 9 by 13, 16 by 16, he had Blamier toms custom made for him. They were on two lighting stands that they would roll in. His drum tech, Rick Fauché, would roll in and put around this Ludwig blue sparkle kit. And he had a bunch of blue sparkle kits, by the way, Hal Blaine. He had double basses, so that the sizes of the blue sparkle kit would always be changing. But most of the times I've seen him use the Blamier toms was either with the kick and a floor tom with the Blamier toms, or with a 9 by 13 tom wrapped around with Blamier toms. That was the Hal Blaine kit. So up through 1975, it was Karen, it was Cubby O'Brien live, it was Hal Blaine in the studio with Karen. And then something changed on the next album, which in 1975 was Horizon. And Horizon had the hit Please Mr. Postman, Only Yesterday, had a song called Solitaire that was a hit. Another one was I'm Caught Between Goodbye and I Love You. And these songs had Jim Gordon on it.
I have found my home here in your arms. Nowhere else on earth I'd really rather be. Life
Gordon was the main drummer on the Horizon album. Jim Gordon was a protege of Hal Blaine, they would say. Jim Gordon is another very important figure in rock music, having played with Delaney and Bonnie, having played with Eric Clapton, okay, having written Layla, having played with a ton of people, and he has got his own little sordid past history when he leaves the music business in 1983, which I'm not going to get into Jim Gordon's life. There are some great podcasts about Jim Gordon's life and a book written about Jim Gordon's life. He passed last year. Jim Gordon, though, was an incredible studio musician, and he fit the part and was able to cop that same Hal feel for the Carpenters. So it was really easy to not think that it wasn't Hal Blaine playing drums, to be honest. Jim Gordon had his own jazzy little style, but he was more solid in the pocket, and he was less risky. One of the things I've learned about Jim Gordon's drumming is Jim Gordon didn't play a lot of crash cymbals. He had a tendency to play fills and then come back on the hi-hat. And it's not an all-the-time thing, but he was very, very tasteful drummer. So Jim Gordon's influence on the Carpenters started with the Horizon album, and then it went to the next album called A Kind of Hush. And Kind of Hush also had Cubby O'Brien playing drums on a Carpenters album for the first time, and Karen played drums on that album as well. So by 1976, Karen was playing very little on albums. They were using guys like Jim Gordon. They've used Hal Blaine. They brought in the live drummer, Cubby O'Brien, to play on one song called Goofus on this Kind of Hush album. The Carpenters were getting more stick-oriented. They were doing a lot of TV shows. There's a couple TV specials. Karen would play on the TV specials. Karen was becoming very good at talking before the camera. But they did that to a lot of artists. I mean, 70s artists got TV shows. Cher, Sonny and Cher got a TV show. Carpenters got some TV specials. So TV was a big part of promoting the records. And they were kind of shifting from touring and doing a lot more television and other things like that. Vegas and other places. And basically, by the time they get to the next album in 1977, Karen's not playing drums at all. She's out front. She's the out front person. And by the 77 album, they brought in two drummers that had never played on a Carpenters album, Ron Tutt and Ed Green. And Ed Green played on a song, All You Get From Love Is a Love Song, which was one of their singles off that album. And the second single off the album is called Calling Occupants of Interplanetary Craft. Calling Occupants of Interplanetary Craft. That's a mouthful to say. Ron Tutt was the drummer on that one. Passage was not a big hit album from what I can tell, but it was, and it was showing the decline of the Carpenters to some extent. And I think Karen and Richard, if you will go through their history, you'll start to see Karen wanting to get married and all that stuff starts happening in this period of time. And less drumming. And Karen, you know, it was their business, so they had to be out on the road doing it. But I think things started to shift around 77. But let's stick with the drummers. The next album in 78 was a Christmas album that still to this day is played during Christmas time. And the drummers on that Christmas album was Cubby O'Brien and Ron Tutt. Now, there is another named drummer that I've read in Wikipedia, but I did not find in Joe Osborne's discography when I looked at this album, because Joe Osborne also played bass on the Christmas Portrait album, a guy named Barry Morgan. So Barry Morgan was an English drummer. So if he did play on the album, he was probably playing something that was done in London with the Philharmonic somewhere. But Cubby O'Brien and Ron Tutt are the credited drummers on Christmas Portrait. And that had Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas and Christmas Darling, Merry Christmas Darling. So many drummers, so much stuff going on, right? So the drummers in the Carpenters were studio drummers. That's what you're starting to find out, is that Hal Blaine, premier studio drummer of the 60s. Jim Gordon, one of the premier studio drummers of the 70s. Ron Tutt was a studio drummer. Ed Green was a studio drummer. By the time we get to Made in America 1981, which probably had sessions from 1979 to 1981, you started to see that they were starting to work in other places. And Joe Osborne brought in other drummers. And I do believe Joe Osborne had something to do with it, because Joe Osborne was playing on albums with a drummer from Nashville called Larry London. And Joe Osborne would play on some country albums and some other albums that were going on in the Nashville scene. So it's kind of ironic that you see Larry London's name on this album, Made in America. Another drummer you see named in that album is J.R. Robinson. He played on a couple cuts. But Larry London played on the song Touch Me When You're Dancing. That was Larry London. Another song called I Believe in You, which were the two hits from the album. Larry London played on both of those, I believe. The other drummer that's on the album is Ron Tutt. So Ron Tutt, Larry London, John J.R. Robinson are on that album. And then in 1983, Karen passes away. Now, before Karen passes away, she plays on a solo album that was titled by 1995, Karen Carpenter. Was never released by the Carpenter, by her brother, Richard, didn't want it released, but he did release parts of that album in an album in 1989 called Love Lines. And Love Lines had Ron Tutt on it. It also had Joe Osborne on bass. It had Cubby O'Brien was on it. It also had Liberty DeVito on it. JR was on it again. And I think possibly Steve Gadd when it comes to the solo album. But when you look at the Love Lines album, you will see Cubby's name on it, you will see Ron Tutt's name, you will see JR's name. And Ron Tutt apparently played on Kiss Me the Way You Did Last Night. When you look at the Karen album and what was going on, it was Phil Ramone was bringing in his guys. That's why I think Steve Gadd got in there on one of the tunes that was on the Karen album that never got out on the Love Lines album. And Liberty DeVito was brought in because Liberty DeVito played on Billy Joel's albums from I believe, I don't think it was Piano Man, but I think it was The Stranger was when Liberty DeVito came in till Billy stopped making big albums. That's Liberty was the drummer for the long, 30 years. So all this to say is the drummers of the Carpenters were a lot of great drummers played on those albums. Karen was a drummer that wanted to be on the albums. And I will say that Hal's style of playing big open tom fills on lots of drums was part of all these drummers' careers. I don't think Ed Green was a big concert tom guy, but I know Ron Tutt had some big kits. Ron Tutt had big kits if you look at his Elvis kits. Larry London was known to play big concert tom kits, Pearl concert toms, by the way. So Hal Blaine had an influence on Ron Tutt. He had an influence on Jim Gordon. He had an influence on Larry London. J.R. Robinson, when he came into town, he had a big concert tom kit, a big Gretsch concert tom kit. Double-headed toms and Gretsch concert toms around it. So JR is another guy that had it. That was the sound of the 70s. Concert toms was the sound of the 70s. Concert toms was the sound of the Carpenters. So anyhow, I hope this Carpenters expose on the drummers who played on the Carpenters albums is something you enjoyed. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask questions. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. I'm not an authority on the Carpenters drummers, but I will say I've played a lot of covers, 42 covers all in all. And many of the songs I mentioned I did covers of. So thank you all for watching. You guys all have a great day. Bye.